Welcome, friends, to this week's episode of You Are Complete. So excited. My colleague, Dr. Natalie Feinblatt, is here with us today to talk to us about the red flags for spiritual seekers.
Yep.
So Natalie and I work together. Her office is actually on the other side of Paris, right over here.
Right here.
And Natalie and I have the pleasure of running groups with Natalie.
Likewise.
And thank you so much. And Natalie will bring in her expertise about cults sometimes. And I have found this fascinating because in our groups that we run, we talk a lot about spirituality. And clients often have a lot of questions. And Natalie has just kind of amazed me with her expertise. You wrote your dissertation on cults.
Yes.
And you have helped people in cults.
Yes.
And you know what people should be looking for that are spiritual seekers.
I try to, yeah.
How did you get into this?
It's just something that was always fascinating to me. And my father spent his entire life working in the film industry. And he worked on a lot of Tom Cruise movies.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Like Days of Thunder, like kind of the big like late 80s, early 90s movies. And, you know, I was a pretty precocious kid, so I kept hearing all the grown-ups talk about, well, he's in Scientology, he's a Scientologist. And I was also a very curious kid, so I'd be like, what's that? And no one could answer my question. Like, they knew what it was, but they didn't know anything about it, and that weirded me out. I'm like, how do you know what this is, but you have
don't
no
know
idea
anything
what
about
it is?
There's so much secrecy.
Right. So, you know, fast forward to high school, and I always feel old when I say this, but, you know, in high school, the internet came out.
I was there.
I know,
Maybe it was a little earlier for me, but yes.
The internet came out, and I was, you know, I'm a person who likes to ask a lot of questions, so of course back then it was like Yahoo and Alta Vista, there wasn't any Google yet, but you know, I would just like randomly type stuff in as it came to me. I want to learn more about this, I want to learn more about that, and one day I was like, Scientology, maybe I can finally get answers on what this whole Scientology thing is. So I started looking up things that were from Scientology and started looking up things that were kind of critical of Scientology, and it just fascinated me. So that kind of got my mind from there. I started researching because a lot of people were saying it was a cult. So I started researching different cults and, you know, things from the past, like Jonestown, things in the present. And it was just something that always was like this pet interest of mine.
Wow.
And when it got time for dissertation time, they tell you write on something that you care about because you're going to spend a lot of time with this dissertation. So you better care. So that was one of my topics, like helping people that have been in cults, like how do you do that? And I gradually just narrowed the list down and that won out. So,
wow.
There it is.
Well, let's start out by telling everybody the definition of like, what is a cult? How would you know if you're in a cult?
Sure. Well, the thing about that is there's no, you know, universally agreed upon definition in the field of cultic studies, which is a field. It's a small field, but it's a field. So what I'm going to do is I'll just give you kind of my rough working definition. I'm not speaking as like a authoritative source on this.
Okay.
But I want to preface it by saying that usually when people are talking about cults, most of the time they're talking about groups that are spiritual or religious in nature, right? And that doesn't have to be a part of a cult.
Really?
Yeah, a cult can be wrapped around any kind of ideology.
Okay.
A cult can be financial, a cult can be political, a cult can be like a self-help, psychology-related cult.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah, anything. Like a lot of people, I don't know if you're familiar with like multi-level marketing or MLM.
I am. Pyramid scheme.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
There are some people who consider certain multi-level marketing companies to be rather cult-like, and that's got nothing to do with spirituality or
That's right.
anything. Yeah.
Okay.
So my kind of rough working definition would be a cult is a group of people that usually have some sort of hierarchical structure, right? That, you know, things kind of pyramid up at the top. And it's a group that brings people in and keeps people in through the use of fear, isolation, absolutes, punishment, and a lot of the time, most of the time, there's also a significant level of exploitation and possibly even outright abuse that's going on. So that would be and like I said, that group can be spiritual, but it might not be at all, right?
What kinds of exploitation do you usually see?
Typically what you see is people working, essentially 80-hour weeks for an organization with like little to no pay. A lot of spiritual organizations take advantage of having tax exemption, which means they don't have to pay people minimum wage.
Really?
They can pay people like $1 an hour if they want to. So you've got some people that are working in these facilities that, are working like 80 hours a week for $2 and, are getting paid, that's the type of exploitation that
could it also be that you're spending a lot of money?
Yeah, a lot of people will end up essentially working for free to pay off the courses that they're taking or the things that they're doing for the group. It's like, well, you can do this for cheaper if you work for us all the time.
Got it.
It's kind of exploitative.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yikes. Not good.
All right. What else do we have? What else do we have that you want to tell us?
Well, I mean, what I'd like to let people know before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it is that, yes, I am a clinical psychologist, so I work in the field of mental health. Yes, I wrote my dissertation on doing therapy with former cult members. There's some literature on that, kind of going over what's helpful, what's not so helpful. And then I've been grateful and blessed to actually work with some people who've come out of cults and try to help them put their lives back together. But I also want to let people know that I am also a spiritual seeker. Like, I don't just have, I've had to apply this knowledge myself, right?
Yes. Yes.
So I don't just, have the academic knowledge in my head. I'm constantly, as you know, because we share, oh, you doing this? Oh, you ever heard of this?
Yeah.
I'm always looking for new groups and classes and workshops and temples and churches and things to do.
Yeah.
And so when I go to these places, if it's my first time there, I have these red flags in the back of my head, right? And luckily, most of the time, they haven't, gone up and the alarm bells haven't gone off. But there have been a few instances over the years where I've been at a thing and ding, 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 and I've had to just kind of quietly,
Right.
So it's not just that I have a professional knowledge of this. I have actually had to apply it in my real life.
And that's what I think is so important, which is why I was like, we got to have you on, because if you're attracted to this, if you're attracted to You Are Complete, it's because you are most likely a spiritual seeker.
Exactly.
And so this could be one of a myriad of things that you are looking into.
Definitely.
I mean, another thing that you said to me too was that, you have to go with your gut.
Yes.
You have to go with your instinct on this. So if you
Absolutely.
go into some kind of a practice or join some kind of a group and it doesn't really feel right to you, or they're asking you to do something, you have every right to get up
Absolutely.
and walk out.
No matter how much pressure people put on you to try to stay, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but some groups will use a lot of kind of psychological manipulation tactics to try to pressure you into sticking around. If I believe that most people have pretty good intuition, and even if you're somewhere and they're not quite fitting these red flags exactly, but something just feels off to you, I say trust that. There's plenty of other options to explore. If something's not feeling right to you, leave. It's okay. It's all right. And you don't owe anybody an explanation either.
That's true. No is a full sentence.
Exactly. No is a full sentence, and I'm leaving. You don't have to say why.
Yeah.
Just say I'm leaving.
I'm leaving.
Yeah.
I'm out of here.
I'm out. Bye.
All right. So should we go over what the main red flags are, so people get an idea of them? Okay.
Definitely. So what I'm gonna base these on is, excuse me, a little dry mouth. It happens. So in the field of cultic studies, there is not, again, one unified checklist that we have that everybody's agreed upon, and it's this is the official cult checklist. The closest we've got are these two sets of criteria by two different really amazing scholars from the past in the field of studying cults, and that's Dr. Robert Lifton and Dr. Margaret Singer, who both have really fascinating books on cults if you ever want to look that up.
Cool.
So they both kind of came up with their sets of criteria, which are fairly similar. I mean, they each have a few independent points that they make. So what I'm going to be talking about today is kind of an adapted version of those points. I'm kind of mushing them both together and just using slightly different language. So that's where these red flags are coming from Lifton's criteria and from Singer's criteria.
Awesome.
And something you've heard me talk about before is that, you know, a lot of social groups will have one or two of these criteria.
Okay.
Right? Like the one that we run into a lot, because we deal with a lot of clients that are in the world of 12 steps.
Yes.
And if we talk about this, one of them is that, you know, the group has its own vocabulary, right? That kind of isolates people who aren't in the group. People go, oh, that's like 12 step, the steps and the slogans and the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, if a group has one of these criteria, that's not really enough to justify calling it a cult.
Okay.
Right? A lot of groups will have one or two of these criteria. The issue you want to pay attention to is if they start having 3 and 4 and 5, right? So instead of the more the merrier, I came up with this earlier, the more the scarier. Okay? So it's like when you hear these, okay, if one of them kind of rings a bell, okay, but if more of them start ringing bells, then it's time to start worrying.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so number 1 is red flag. They try to control your environment and how you spend your time. Okay. So, you know, a lot of times if you're a seeker, you'll hear about some workshop or some class. You'll be like, that sounds cool, right? And you'll go and it'll be for a few hours or whatever it is. What that can evolve into for some groups is all of a sudden you're getting invited to all these events and you're being invited, so it makes you feel special. Right?
Yes.
Like, well, they want me to come.
Yes.
But it's like these events start taking 5 hours and 6 hours. And, you know, all of a sudden, all of your weekends are being spent there and maybe even after work. And that could be a little bit of a red flag. It's like, I get being enthusiastic about a place. And it's different if you're the one who's initiating going there all the time. But if you're really feeling like you're getting pulled there an awful lot, or you're constantly getting phone calls from the people in the group, like, hey, come for this, sign up for this, let's talk, what do you know, and it's like, it's feeling like a little bit of a pull as opposed to you approaching it.
Yes.
That's not so good.
Okay, bombarded with invitations.
Yeah, and time, and another thing is when you're there, or when you're with the people from there, they try to control the environment itself. In other words, there are some like weekend seminars where the doors are locked for 8 hours. And it's like, you're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to have your phone. You have to go to the bathroom, hold it. You're not allowed to eat.
Wow.
Right? And it's of course they don't tell you this, like, oh, we're not going to let you eat or go to the bathroom, but it's like, in order to elevate yourself to a higher spiritual level, we are going to work on not giving into the urges of...
I see. So it's different that I have a lot of people that I know that have gone to like the silent retreats, but when you're doing that, you go in knowing that there's no phone, there's no conversation, there are meals.
Right, but yeah, that's the thing.
This is like the surprise element.
Yeah, this is the surprise element. It's like all of a sudden, and it's like your basic needs can't be met, like for food and going to the bathroom. And that's also a manipulation technique. Because people who are hungry are easier to push around. People who are really focused on having to go to the bathroom will be like, yeah, okay, I'll do it, just let me go to the bathroom, right?
Yeah, your defenses are down.
That's a manipulation tactic. Okay. Right? Not good.
Not good. We
Not
don't
a
like
good
that.
sign. No.
We don't do that.
Not a good thing. So another red flag is the presence of black or white thinking. And I'm going to get a little bit into my own personal biases on this, and I'm going to preface it by saying that this is my own personal bias. I don't trust places that say that they are the only way. That's just me. Yeah. That's a red flag for me personally. Yeah. It's like, this is the only way to enlightenment, to God, to a good afterlife, whatever you want to call it. Like, it's, you know, this or nothing. Right?
I think what's interesting, though, is I think that a lot of schools of spirituality kind of say that.
Some of them do, but some of them are more extreme than others.
Okay.
You know? Excuse me. So if there's a lot of kind of, you know, this is the absolute, this is the only way, and then what comes along with that is there's a ton of pressure for you to conform to this belief system perfectly, right? That's something I love about 12 steps, right? Progress, not perfection, right? There's not this emphasis on perfection, right?
Yes.
So it's like you have to conform, it has to be perfect, and then if you don't, there's a lot of shaming that goes on,
yucky.
Right? It's like, yeah, there's like, oh, you're not going to do things exactly the way we've told you to? Oh. Right? There's a lot of that.
Another psychological manipulation, because then you're getting beat down, your self-esteem's low.
Exactly.
You're not as
Exactly.
likely to be
No.
assertive.
No.
Yeah.
When people are in shame, they are not in a good place, right?
Mhm.
So when you shame people because they're not adhering perfectly to the dogma or the doctrine, it's
Mhm.
like that's not going to put people in a good headspace.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So a third red flag is what I'll call public confession.
Hmm.
And that can actually mean two different things. Number one, if there is literal pressure to confess your sins, some groups even call them your crimes against the group, right? If there's this pressure to get up in front of everybody and confess the things you've done wrong, and like deeply, deeply personal stuff, right?
Mhm.
That's usually not a good sign, right? It's one thing if you know ahead of time, like if you go up there to talk to the teacher or whatever, you're gonna, all this personal stuff's gonna come up. And it's another thing if they tell you, like, you only have to share what you're comfortable sharing, right? That's okay.
That's healthy.
But it's like, if it's like you, and it's like, if you don't get up here now and like flay yourself open, there's gonna be repercussions. That's a really bad sign.
That's not good.
Right? That's not good. And the other meaning of this is some groups have more kind of private, like one-on-one sort of counseling, where you're supposed to really dig deep and talk about really deeply personal, like the nitty-gritty of like your sex life and like, stuff that's highly personal. And then that information is not kept confidential, right? Because, like, say what you will about the Catholic Church, I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but priests have gone to jail for refusing to share information that was shared in confession, right? So that when you're
Wow.
confessing in the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
it's not going anywhere,
Yeah.
right? However, and I've worked with clients where this has happened, where they've been in these sessions, shared extremely personal stuff, and then when they were having a hard time with the group,
It's used
other
against
people
them.
came at them with this stuff that they know they only talked about with this one person. It's like, well, how else would they know that?
Again, used as punishment,
Uh-huh.
shaming, and manipulation.
Yeah, exactly.
And also this factor that I feel like keeps coming up is like where you're feeling forced and you're being
Yes.
told you have to do this and it's not coming from within you.
Right, exactly. So yeah, any sort of either forced confession in public, or confession where what you're saying is not kept sacred and private, not a good sign, right? Not a good sign. So the next one I'll talk about, I mentioned it a little earlier in the literature, it's known as loaded language, which is if a group has its own kind of vocabulary and it's used in a way to really kind of isolate people away from the general population.
Like we're special?
Like we're special,
And
yeah.
everybody else out there sucks?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I will mention Scientology in this regard because if you just go out and read some of the books that are publicly available, they're very hard to read because they have kind of their own, they've made up their own words, first of all. So those are hard. It's like, I've never heard that word before. What does that mean? They give certain words that we use a totally different meaning, right? Like they call a hat is actually a class. Like, so if you're taking your student hat, it means you're taking your student class. But if you said that to somebody, like, hat? Like,
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that they use a ton of acronyms. So there's like this alphabet soup and everything. And so if you're talking to somebody who's really into Scientology, they might be talking and they're like, I'm understanding like a third of what they're saying, right? And it kind of makes it hard for them to talk to people outside of the group because they want to talk about all this stuff and people don't know what the heck they're talking about.
Wow.
Right?
So it starts to create this separation where you really have to start confiding in just the people of your group.
Exactly.
Because your outside world isn't going to get it.
No, and something that I would also caution against is groups that come up, again, this isn't one thing that you should focus on and be like, that makes it a cult, but it's just another kind of like, this isn't another good sign. If they have kind of a derogatory sounding name or slang word for people who aren't in the group. In Scientology, they call people outside wogs. They call it the wog world. No. They call it the wog world, and I talked to this
Sounds
wog.
like a wet slog.
Yeah, I don't know But I mean,
Or
that's
sloth.
that's a
wet
pretty,
sloth.
yeah, it's not a fun, sexy word. It's clearly like an, ugh, like,
Yeah.
don't want to talk to the wogs, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, that's not good. You should, to me, that's like kind of like a racial slur,
Mm-hmm.
you know? It's like, oh, don't pay attention to those, ugh, that label.
Group.
Yeah.
And we're better than that group. And
exactly.
they're down here.
Yeah,
and we're up here.
Exactly. So
Okay.
if the language does that,
Mm-hmm.
not a good sign, right? Red flag. Let's see, we've got a few more to go. So one thing that a lot of groups will do is they'll have this belief system, and if you bring life experiences to them that contradict the belief system,
Mm-hmm.
they will tell you that not explicitly, but the message you will receive is that you need to reinterpret your life experience in order to fit our doctrine. And an example that I can give of that is, there are certain cultic groups that really don't like psychiatrists, right?
How about psychologists?
Yeah, or psychologists.
How about
Anything
licensed marriage film therapist?
those might be okay. It's anything that starts with the psych prefix.
Okay.
And if somebody comes to them and is like, well, you know what, actually my uncle's a psychiatrist and I've never seen him do anything bad and he's actually a pretty good guy, it'll be like, well, you better figure out something that he's done wrong and fixate on that. Like, did he ever, forget to give you a present at Christmas one year? And it's like, well, yeah. And it's like, whoa, well, then that shows you, And it's like, but my experience doesn't fit what you guys are telling me. So you're kind of forced to,
interpret your life through that lens.
Yeah, exactly.
And if it doesn't fit, you're going to get
a bad
pressured.
thing. Mm-hmm.
I could see how that could be done in such a manipulative manner. Because
Yeah.
even as a clinician, it's like we try to help people look at their past in
Right.
order to create a different future a lot of
Right.
the time. And it's like, how about we look at it with this lens? And do you feel like it was really, maybe that was the full story?
Yeah.
And
Well, I think the difference, and I have a feeling you probably do this with your clients because I do. It's like you present those lenses, and then if the client's like, no, I'm just not seeing it that way. You're like, okay.
That's
just wanted to
absolutely
give you
true.
that option. Right?
I always say I may make
Yeah.
an interpretation and it may not be accurate, and if not, tell me. Right? Just tell me. 'Cause,
Yeah, there's no
no room for that.
Mm-mm,
Oh
no.
man. Okay.
So that's another good red flag to just bring up is that the issue is if the group has a doctrine that you cannot question, that you cannot criticize, that you cannot think critically about it anyway. And if you are, you're wrong, right?
Wow. This
yeah.
so goes against everything that I talk about. Because
Yeah,
one of
exactly.
the things, the
Uh-huh.
reason I created this video podcast was because in the groups that I run and the work that I do is because I feel like the spiritual journey is a journey of questions.
Right.
And so I wanted to create a space where all of the questions
I agree
were
with you on that.
welcome.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So
And-
if you're getting the
yeah.
feeling that no questions allowed,
Right.
that's
bad.
oh.
And it's interesting because a lot of groups in the last maybe 10 or so years have adopted this way of shutting down criticism that makes you kind of feel bad for or they're trying to make you feel bad for criticizing them. If you try to raise any questions, and I hate to say it, Scientology is really good at this. If you raise any questions or any criticism, they look at you and you go, that's hate speech. You're a bigot. Right?
What? They do that?
Yeah.
I mean, I watched that
Because
documentary.
That's very loaded language. Nobody wants to be a bigot
and nobody wants to hate
speech, right? You're like, oh my God, no. And it's like, but that's a great way to shut people up right away.
Oh, it's very powerful.
Right? Yeah, it's very
just
powerful.
Like a wall.
So if you and I'm not saying people who are saying, oh, Scientology sucks. Okay, that's not the most constructive criticism, right?
Yeah.
But if they're going, well, could you explain to me why disconnection is a voluntary policy versus like a mandate? And they're like, you're a bigot, hate speech, prejudice. It's like, I just want an answer to a question. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So if you're running into that, like questions just get shut down like a mofo, not good.
not good.
Bad.
Not good. Not
Yeah.
good.
So a few more things that are definitely red flags. If you are being asked to cut people out of your life who are not members of the group, that's usually not the best sign. It's like, it's one thing if you have people in your life that are critical of a spiritual thing that you've decided to get into, and maybe you decide, like, I'm just not going to talk to this person about it anymore because they don't get it, I'm not feeling supported. That's one thing. But if you're kind of receiving either a mandate or kind of like a voluntary suggestion that you cut people out of your life, that's usually a pretty bad sign. It's like, you know, it's one thing if like a therapist is suggesting that you cut someone who's like abusing you out of your life.
Yeah.
And again, that would just be a suggestion.
Or toxic or causing you a lot of distress.
Right.
But yeah.
But if you're like, well, your parents don't want to join the group, so you're going to have to cut them off. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's a little scary.
Yeah.
Bad sign. So a couple more points to make. One is that if the group tries to sell you the message, it usually isn't the message right away. It's usually a little down the line, but it could still be a red flag that, like, without this group, you kind of suck. You know? Like, without us, you would not be doing very well. You know?
Oh my god.
And a lot of groups are really good at doing this sort of manipulation where it's like, whenever anything goes wrong in your life, that's your fault. Whenever anything goes right in your life, it's because you're a member of our group. And it's, you know, so if you're getting the message that like, well, without us, you really wouldn't be getting by in life and life would kind of suck and you wouldn't be doing nearly as well, groups are supposed to lift you up, right? They're not supposed to be like, if you didn't have us, your life would kind of be awful, you know?
Oh my god, like the amount of getting the person to be solely dependent on the group is just so
it's not
obvious.
Not
Okay.
And then lastly, I'd say a lot of groups have a structure where, you know, people are rewarded for behaving in certain ways, right? And I don't think that a reward system is necessarily a problem, but if there's a punishment system in the group, that's a different issue, right? If you are actually given like negative consequences and punishments because you've done things wrong in the eyes of the group, that's usually a pretty bad sign. You know, some groups have you actually, you know, pay financial penalties when you do certain things wrong. Some groups will actually, you know, assign you to do certain tasks or work that's very unpleasant, like manual labor, if you screw up. So, okay, rewards, maybe, you know, some groups do that, that's fine. But like punishments, again, that we keep making this face, and it's because it's like, no.
I have to tell you, a lot of this, well, there's two things that I'm thinking. The first thing is, it seems like being a person that studied different spiritualities, and, you know, I went to, you know, a religious school growing up, some of these things are definitely things that I think we find in religious and spiritual practices frequently, like
they can
the
be.
confession and the
language
like
specific
stuff.
language,
but I really want to make sure everybody gets the point that it's most groups will have one or two of these things, but when they start to have three, four more, that's when you're getting into a red zone.
Yeah, exactly.
What you described to me, the combination, and some of them, it sounds so horrible to me. Why would anybody join a cult? How does that happen? Is there like a profile of people that join cults or what?
Well, you make a really good point. And, you know, I've heard this a lot because when I mentioned that I have this area of expertise, people are like, oh, you know, I'd never join a cult. I'm too strong. I'm too, like, mentally, you know, those are for, like, weak people. Unfortunately, that's a myth that we tell ourselves because it makes us feel like we would never be vulnerable to a cult. There really is no profile. There's no, like, weak-minded person profile of people who are, like, super susceptible to cults. Really, anybody can be susceptible to a cult. Typically what we see is a lot of people end up joining cults during times of loss or painful transitions in their lives. And those happen to everybody, right? So a lot of people will end up kind of getting sucked into a group when they're getting a divorce, or there's been a death to somebody really close to them, or they've lost their job, right? Some sort of negative, painful loss or transition in their life. People tend to be particularly vulnerable around that. And you're right. I mean, a lot of these things sound awful, and you'd be like, why would anybody join a group that does this? Most groups are really good at not letting these things be what people see at first, you know? Oftentimes what you'll see at first, and this is something that used to be talked about a lot in the field, not so much anymore, is this process called love bombing, where a lot of groups will start off by being like really like, you're awesome, we love you, we want you to be a part of our group, you're so amazing, you have so much potential, and it feels really good. Like, we all like to hear that stuff about ourselves, right?
And I was just gonna say, especially if you're in a time of transition,
Yeah.
which makes all of us
You're
feel
already
like
feeling
we're questioning and unstable, and it could be scary,
Yeah.
and then you're surrounded
Yeah.
by a love bomb, and
Right?
you're like,
It's
this
like,
is,
this
feels
is amazing,
good.
right? And it's not until you've kind of gotten ensconced in the group, unless of course you know about the red flags ahead of time, which is why we're doing this, to hopefully give people that knowledge. But oftentimes it's not until you've sunk in a lot of time and energy and quite possibly money into a group that stuff starts to kind of be like, oh, that's not so great. That's not so great. But then that creates what we call cognitive dissonance, right? Because it's like, on the one hand, you're like, I've spent all of this time and money and energy on this group, but things aren't looking good. I don't make bad decisions, so things must be okay. Things must be okay.
Oh, wow.
Right? I mean, it's, you know, it's this thing, it's called the sunken time fallacy, where people are like, I've already spent so much time and money and energy, I might as well stick with it. It must be, it's okay. I wouldn't do something bad like that.
And that's factored into the process of the cult. Wow.
Yeah. The cults are smart. They know this. At least the people at the top do.
Yeah.
You know? And it's one of my favorite quotes about this from, I believe, Mark Twain, which is, it's a lot easier to fool people than it is to convince people they've been fooled. You know? It's like people who...
Yes. I had to think that one over.
People who've spent a ton of time and money don't want to think that they've been fooled.
Oh, yeah, because then you're like, what did I do that for?
Right,
It seems
all
like
these
a waste.
years and these, you know, and that's why it's so hard for people to leave.
Well, can we talk about that?
Yeah,
If somebody listening to this realizes that they, oh my goodness, they're in a cult.
Right.
What can they do if they want to get out of it?
Yeah. Well, the number one resource I would say to anybody is to contact an sorry about that. Contact a organization called the International Cultic Studies Association. Say that again. International Cultic Studies Association. ICSA for short, right? Okay. If you Google that, you'll get their website. They are an organization of academics and professionals, like mental health professionals like myself. I'm a member. Who this is what they do. They exist to study cults and to help people who are getting out of them. So what you do is you reach out to them, call them, email them, whatever, and say, you know, this is where I am. I think I need to leave. I don't have a lot of resources. What do I do? They will get back to you. They have a worldwide network of people.
Wow.
You know, if you're in LA, they might get in touch with me, right? Or they might give you my information. And there's a few other people in LA who do this work. But they'll try to figure out the closest people to you who would be good to get in touch with. If there's support groups, if there's individual, you know, clinicians or therapists. And also they'll help you try to hook you up with resources for, like, okay, here's a food bank. Because usually when people leave cults, they got nothing.
That's right.
You know, it's like, where can I stay? Where do I go physically, right? They can help you with that.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to know that resource is available.
And I would also recommend that if you have had to cut certain people out of your life, like good friends or family members, people that are healthy, okay people, you might want to try to see if you can sneak in a phone call or an email to them. Because most of the time, they're just waiting outside for years for you to finally reach out and be like, I need help.
Wow.
You know, they will probably try to swoop in and help you as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, those are really, really good steps.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that we had this talk today.
Me too, because I think that if more people knew what these red flags were, even if it just keeps like a small percentage of people from joining these groups, that's still a small percentage of people that don't end up being abused and exploited and, you know, wasting tons of time and money on stuff that's not going to ultimately help them at all.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I feel like it's so much more prevalent than a lot of us think, because you had just sent me that article, and this was capturing, you know, women in their 20s and 30s who were savvy and, you know, could be anybody that we know.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Thank you for having me here.
Dr. Natalie, you have a private practice right here in West Los Angeles.
Yeah.
People can reach out to you if they would like to have a therapist
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
specializes in addiction.
Yes.
If
That's-
recovering from cults.
Yeah, I mean, my recovery from cults is definitely something that I specialize in, but it's a very small niche, right? Not something you can build a practice on, unfortunately. So my main specialty is addiction, both chemical and behavioral. So if you are suffering from an untreated addiction, I'd be happy to meet you where you're at and try to help you transition from just surviving, which is usually what you're doing if you're in active addiction, to actually living and thriving. And also something new that I'm doing in my practice is I am now trained in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a mouthful.
Incredible.
I've been trained by the EMDR Institute, and I am practicing it about 4 feet that way.
Yes.
On the
And
other
being
side of
somebody
this
that has
wall.
personally participated in EMDR, it is a very powerful
Yeah.
intervention
Because
for trauma.
And I mean, there's such a huge overlap. That's why I wanted to learn it, because the incidence of trauma in the addiction population is so much higher than it is in the general population, right?
Yeah.
And it also helps with former cult members, because some people have truly been traumatized by their experience. So
Absolutely. Based
Yeah.
on what you said, I don't see how you couldn't be.
yeah, really.
Everyone, I'm going to put Dr. Natalie's contact information in the show notes if you want to
Thank
get in
you.
touch with
I
her.
appreciate that. I've got
She
a
would love to hear
website,
from you.
phone number, email. I'm always on my email.
It's true. She
So,
responds back to me like
I
that.
do. Yeah. Shoot me an email. I'm here.
If you are somebody that is listening to this that is in trouble, that's involved with a cult, please ask for help.
Mhm.
There's help available to you, and
Yes.
you don't have to live that life anymore.
It's never too late.
It is never too late.
Mm-mm.
Everyone else, I would love to hear your comments about what you thought about this episode,
Mhm.
and we will see you next week. Thank
Awesome.
you so much.
Thank you.
Always remember that you are complete, you are whole, and you are miraculous. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.